Hey, this is Matt, and you're listening to Better Content Everywhere. Hey everyone, welcome to Better Content Everywhere. This is the podcast that helps you create clear, consistent, and compelling content no matter where you're creating. Our digestible and bingeable episodes are going to give you one key learning every single episode in a format that fits right into your schedule. So today we're going to talk about starting your podcast. If you think you've got a good idea for a podcast, you should definitely do it. Get started. You'll join the 5 million podcasts in the world that are vying for the 505 million listeners and growing. But remember, our metric, if we're going to start a podcast, isn't necessarily all about listeners and downloads. We'll come back to that. Creating a podcast can feel like a lot, but the hardest step is really the first one, which is let's get started. So how are we going to start? First, we're going to write it. We're going to lay out a rough outline for the show. It doesn't need to be something that's like set in stone, but you should have some guidelines as you go in. Because if you go into that first episode unprepared and you try to wing it, everyone's going to hear it, and that first impression will not go well. As you go through your process and you're working on your show, keep in mind ways that you may be able to operationalize some of your efforts and scale it so that you don't have to work so hard, right? Because if you want to be successful, you need to be able to consistently produce episodes for your audience. And you're not going to be able to do that if you're trying to catch up every single week and create a show. Obviously, if you have a podcast, it needs a name. So what's the show going to be called? Don't overthink it, but do make sure that you take a little bit of time and check the podcast directories to see if something already exists with the name that you want. Because otherwise, you're going to have a little bit of a challenge getting the web domains and anything like that you might want to set up. AI is a great tool to help you with naming. If you use some of the ideas you wrote down about what your podcast is focusing on, that can help formulate the prompt for you, and you're going to end up with plenty to go on and get you down the road of a great name for your podcast. You obviously have to host it. Now, we're not talking about recording right now, like the actual physical act of hosting it. We're talking about where's your podcast going to live. It has to have a place on the internet that it lives. And there are a ton of options out there, really depending on your end goals. There are tons of them that are great about simple distribution to multiple podcast platforms. It will take some time and some energy to get those all set up and get the right things kind of filled in the right boxes. I typically recommend people to look at either Spotify for podcasters or just staying simple and living in the Apple Podcast Connect platform. Personally, I host mine on Spotify for podcasters because it has native video support. Though the implementation isn't ideal, we can talk about that another time. It does have it, and listeners are listening on Spotify. Next up, gear up or don't. Now, this is where people can get a little stuck. The gear you use for your podcast is largely a choice based on the kind of investment that you're comfortable making and how you want the end product to look and sound. A lot of times, people want to know, hey, what microphone do I need? Where should I be recording it? Do I need a mixer? Should I have a studio? Should I be like renting space in a studio? Do I need an audio person? How complicated is all of this? And the reality is you can start with very simple tools. Even if you just want to pick up a better microphone, you can spend less than $200 and you could record your audio in your meetings platform of choice. So no problem. Now, if you're not interested in a video podcast, you can even pick up some handheld audio recorders from Zoom, not the meetings company, like the M2 Mic Track or the Zoom H4 Essential, both of which are featuring 32-bit float recording, which means you can get a clean audio signal every single time. So these are phenomenal tools to have if you want to do in-person recordings. I like to look really at other industries, though, to learn from. And if you look at the video game and streaming industry, you're going to see a lot of people using Elgato equipment. So fortunately, Elgato also just came out with an entire line of gear called Neo that is great for enhancing how we look and sound without breaking the bank. It's a very affordable set of equipment. So I would recommend checking that out if you don't have gear that you want already. Obviously, you have to record your podcast if you want to start one. If you're having guests, you're going to need a way to bring them in remotely, or you need a plan for how you're going to record that in person. There are a lot of options out there for remote recordings currently. You can use a meeting platform like Zoom, but you're going to get better quality recordings from something like Riverside FM, Squadcast, which is now owned by Descript, and Ecamm Live. And each of these have pros and cons, but know that each of these platforms provides high quality recording of audio and video of both you and your guests. Now, if you're going to do in-person video podcasting, that can get a little more complicated because you're now working through the potential for multi-camera sets. The most straightforward way, shoot a wide shot in 4K, and you're going to be able to at least do some minor cropping to creatively edit that in post. Once you record your podcast, obviously you have to edit it. You or someone will need to take time to trim this episode up. They don't need to be intense edits. It could be as simple as trimming off the dead recording spaces at the front and back of the show, and boom, Bob's your uncle. But you may want to clean up some ums and other filler words, or edit out sections of responses that maybe didn't go the way you wanted them to. And to do that, you're going to need more advanced video and audio editing options. For many, though, something like Descript can be a great tool. If you're interested, you should check it out. It basically lets you edit podcasts by deleting text from the transcriptions that are auto-generated. So very cool tool. Check it out. Last but not least, you're going to need to launch your podcast, right? But not until you have at least 4 episodes. That's going to give you a little bit of runway to stay ahead. Trust me. Otherwise, you're going to likely suffer the same fate of the majority of podcasts ever created. More than 90% never make it past episode 3. So if you have 4 episodes, you're already ahead of the game. You're going to want to have some intentionality with your launch, of course, and it really should have its own strategy. We're going to cover that in a later piece of content for you, but you'll want to do all the normal things: social post plans and reels and email lists and newsletters, all the things. You're going to want to do all that, but we'll cover that another time. If you've got questions, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to share some advice with you if you need some. Thanks for listening, everybody. Like us, rate us, subscribe, do all the things. And until we talk next time, keep it clear, keep it consistent, and keep that content compelling.